Three women, one city, each of them standing at the edge of a chapter they did not know how to begin. None of them knew yet that the beginning was already in motion, and that it would start in the most unexpected place. This is a story about three women who reached 70 years old and decided, quietly but firmly, that the best chapter of their lives had not been written yet. What you are about to watch will make you laugh, make you cry, and make you believe that it is never, ever too late to begin. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name is Tiara. She is 70 years old, Black American, with white hair swept into a perfect chignon and a Chanel suit that fits her the way only very expensive things fit a person. She spent 31 years as a federal judge, 31 years of courtrooms and verdicts and the weight of consequence. She gave the law everything, her mornings, her focus, her full and formidable attention. Now she is standing in the lobby of one of Dubai's finest hotels, and every person in that lobby is aware of her without being able to explain why. She is divorced. Her children are grown. Her career is over, and she is only just beginning. Her name is Natalie. She is 70 years old, pale-skinned, with a silver-white bob and the quiet precision of someone who never wasted a single step in her life. She was a cardiothoracic surgeon for 43 years. She held lives in her hands in the most direct way one human being can hold another's, and she did it with a steadiness that earned her a reputation across 3 continents. Her husband Robert died 4 years ago. She has been living in a Dubai hotel ever since, not because she cannot afford a home, but because she has not yet decided what home means without him. Her name is Clara. She is 70 years old, with white hair and soft waves past her shoulders and the warmth of a woman who has spent her life taking care of everyone around her. She was a homemaker for 4 decades. She raised 4 children, managed a large household, and did all of it with grace and without complaint. But the house emptied, the children grew, and Clara found herself moving through room after room of her own life, feeling like a visitor. She is in the kitchen of a rented Dubai apartment this morning, baking a cake nobody asked for, simply because she wanted to. In a modest community center in central Dubai, on a Thursday evening, in a room that smelled of fresh flowers and quiet sadness. They met at a grief support group, which is perhaps not where you would expect to find 3 women like these. For Tiara, grief was the silence of a career that had ended. For Natalie, it was the absence of the man who had quietly held her world together. For Clara, it was the slow, polite distance that had opened between her and the man she had given 40 years of her life to, and the question of who she was without that structure. Dr. Amina, the group facilitator, arranged chairs in a circle. Many people came that Thursday evening, but 3 of them sat in a way that suggested they had not fully decided whether they belonged there. Tiara arrived first. She sat down, crossed her ankles, placed her Birkin on her lap, and looked straight ahead. In 31 years on the bench, she had presided over some of the most difficult rooms imaginable. But this was different. Here she had no authority. She was simply a woman in a circle, waiting to admit that something hurt. Natalie came in 2 minutes later, moved to a seat 2 chairs away, gave Tiara the briefest nod, and looked forward. Clara arrived last, walked in slowly as if still deciding whether to stay, and sat in the seat between the 2 women without appearing to choose it. She placed her clutch on her knee, looked at her hands, and exhaled with the quietness of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time. Dr. Amina moved through the circle gently, asking each person to share in one sentence what had brought them there. When it came to Tiara's turn, she said without sentiment, "I gave 45 years to the law. I retired 8 months ago. I have no idea who I am without it." The room was still. Natalie spoke next without being asked. "I was a cardiothoracic surgeon for 43 years. I saved thousands of lives." A pause. "I cannot remember the last time I did something purely for myself." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "My children are grown. My husband and I have been living in the same house for 40 years, and lately we feel like strangers sharing a kitchen. I do not know where the years went." Dr. Amina moved on, but something had already changed in that small triangle of chairs. Something quiet and impossible to name had passed between 3 women who had never met before that evening. After the session, all 3 arrived at the water table at the same moment. Nobody had arranged it. Tiara poured a glass and said without looking up, "You were a surgeon?" Natalie said, "Cardiothoracic. 43 years." Tiara said, "I was a federal judge. 31 years on the bench." They both looked at Clara. Clara said quietly but steadily, "I raised 4 children and managed a household for 4 decades. That is its own kind of expertise." Tiara looked at her for a moment, then said, "Yes, it is." Natalie said, "Are either of you hungry?" It was a simple question, and yet it was the question that started everything. They went to a fancy restaurant. They sat at a corner table overlooking the water and talked for 3 hours, the way women talk when they have been holding things in for a long time and have finally found people who understand without requiring explanation. Tiara told them about her marriage. 22 years to a man who loved the idea of her more than he loved her. He wanted a successful wife, she said, turning her wine glass slowly. What he did not want was a wife more successful than him. She had filed for divorce at 58. Natalie told them about Robert, a quiet, steady man who had never once made her feel her career was too large for their marriage. She had worked 90-hour weeks while he tended their garden. She had assumed there would be more time. There was not. He died on a Tuesday morning while she was in surgery, and by the time she switched her phone back on, he was already gone. Clara talked about Jeffrey carefully, choosing words the way a woman does when she is not ready for the larger truth beneath them. She said they had been happy once, that somewhere in the last decade they had become very polite to each other, and that the politeness had begun to feel like a kind of distance neither of them knew how to close. They ordered dessert. They ordered tea. The restaurant emptied around them, and they did not notice. At midnight, Tiara set down her cup and said, "I am not ready to go home." Natalie said, "Neither am I." Clara said nothing, but she did not move. Then quietly she said, "I have been thinking about not going home at all." The 3 of them looked at each other, and in that look was everything. It was Tiara who said it, calmly, the way she had once delivered verdicts. "Then let us find a house." The house was in a massive estate. A private villa with a big pool, a professional kitchen, a spa room, and staff quarters. High ceilings. Cool marble floors. Every window framing a different version of Dubai. They bought it together, split 3 ways, without drama, in the way that women who have spent decades making serious decisions handle something they are certain of. They hired a house manager named Fatima, a gifted Italian chef named Marco, a housekeeper named Joy, and a driver named Hassan who appeared exactly when needed and never asked unnecessary questions. They moved in on a Saturday in October. That first night Marco set a table on the terrace without being asked. Sea bass, roasted vegetables, a cold bottle of wine in the Gulf evening. Natalie raised her glass and said, "To us." They drank. The first week was quiet. 3 women learning each other's routines. Tiara up before dawn with black coffee and the news. Natalie through yoga by 6:30 before appearing for breakfast. Clara coming down last in a silk robe with her hair loose and her face unguarded in a way she had not allowed herself in 40 years of marriage. Marco made something different every morning. They ate together without planning to. It became their first ritual. On the 8th morning, Tiara said, "I want to start training. Physical training. I want to know what this body is actually capable of." Natalie said, "I have been thinking the same thing." They looked at Clara. Clara said, "I have never exercised a day in my life." A pause, which is probably exactly why I should start. They joined the gym and paid for a private program with a trainer named Laura, a young woman with focused energy backed by genuine expertise. She looked at the 3 of them on the first morning, white-haired and upright in brand-new Lululemon, wearing more jewelry than most people bring to a gym, and did not flinch. She said, "We start with where you are, not where you think you should be." Tiara said, "I appreciate that." The first 2 weeks were humbling. Bodies that had been given everything except physical attention protested loudly. Clara's knees. Natalie's old shoulder injury. Tiara discovering that commanding a courtroom and commanding your own muscles were entirely different challenges. But they came back every morning. Laura added a Friday dance fitness class. Nobody expected Natalie to love it most. Natalie did not expect it herself. It was Clara who said one morning at breakfast, "I have dressed for Jeffrey for 40 years. I want to dress for myself. I want to wear color. I want to walk into a shop and choose something because it is exactly what I want." She looked at the other 2. "I want to go shopping. Properly." They cleared a Tuesday. Hassan drove them to the Dubai Mall. straight to the designer floor. They moved through Dior and Celine and Bottega Veneta with the unhurried assurance of women who had nothing to justify. In Valentino, Tiara stood in a deep burgundy gown, and Natalie said quietly, "You look extraordinary." And Tiara looked at her own reflection for a long moment and said, "Yes, I think I do." In Dior, Clara stood holding a dress the color of a ripe tangerine. 40 years of cream and navy and safe blush. She held it against herself and looked in the mirror, and something crossed her face that was very close to recognition. She bought it. She also bought a cobalt blue gown, wide-leg forest green trousers, 2 Hermes scarves, and shoes that were completely impractical and exactly right. At Van Cleef & Arpels, Natalie stood at the counter looking at a cascade of diamonds and emeralds, elaborate and joyful and nothing like anything she had ever owned. She fastened it around her neck, looked in the mirror, and bought it without deliberating. They stopped for lunch. A joke was made by Clara, and she laughed. Not a polite, managed laugh. A full, unguarded laugh at something Tiara said, so genuine that Natalie started laughing too, and a table across the room turned to look at them, and none of them cared at all. It was Natalie who suggested the club. She said it one evening by the pool, calmly, the way she said most things. "I have never been to a real nightclub in my life. I was studying during the years most people do that. Then I was a resident, then a consultant, then a department head, and then I was 60 and it seemed too late." She looked at the water. "I do not believe it is too late." They then decided to go clubbing that Friday. Friday night the city showed everything it knew about beauty and abundance. Preparing took 3 hours. Hassan drove them. They arrived at 10:30, were shown to an elevated table with a view across the entire venue, and for the first 20 minutes simply sat and took it in. Then Natalie said, "I want to dance." Clara said, "Natalie." Natalie said, "I mean it. I have wanted this my entire life and never once given myself permission." She stood up. Tiara looked at her for one moment, then stood too. Clara sat alone for exactly 30 seconds. Then she stood. There was no awkwardness, no self-consciousness. 3 women who had spent their lives in total control of everything they showed the world, letting all of it go for one long evening under an open Dubai sky. People noticed. That was inevitable. A woman in her 40s came to their table when they sat back down and said to Tiara, "I hope you do not mind. You 3 are the most magnetic people in this room tonight." Tiara said graciously, "Thank you. We are only just getting started." The call came on a Wednesday morning. Clara was in the gym when her phone rang, and she saw Jeffrey's name. She stepped into the corridor and answered. He said he was in Dubai. He needed to see her. She told him to come to the house at noon. On the drive home, she sat quietly, and Tiara, beside her, put one hand over Clara's and left it there. Jeffrey arrived exactly at noon. They sat on the terrace. Fatima brought tea and disappeared. Jeffrey looked at his wife, at the white hair and the quiet assurance that was different from the quiet he had known for 40 years, and said, "You look well, Clara." She said, "I feel well, Jeffrey." He said, "I think we grew old in different directions, and I think we have both known it for perhaps 10 years and have been too polite to say so." He said he did not want a divorce. He said he was thinking about Portugal. A colleague had a property. He had always wanted to be near the sea. He said it without drama, in the way 2 people speak when they have already privately grieved what they are now saying aloud. Clara said, "I want you to be happy, Jeffrey. I mean that." He looked at her and said, "I want the same for you. I think, perhaps for the first time, you are learning to do that." After he left, Clara sat on the terrace alone. Tiara and Natalie stayed inside and gave her the air and the time. When she came back and she went upstairs, washed her face, changed her blouse, and came to the kitchen where Marco was preparing lunch. She sat at the island. Tiara came and sat beside her. Natalie took the other side. Nobody said anything that needed saying for a while. Then Clara said, "I think I knew it too. For a long time." She looked at her hands. "I do not want to grieve it quietly by myself anymore. I think I would rather cry once, properly, and then get on with it." Natalie said simply, "Then cry." Clara cried. Not for long. With the dignity of a woman setting down something she had carried alone for years. Then Marco put lunch on the table, and they ate. Natalie booked the Maldives without asking. 4 nights there. Overwater bungalows above water, so clear you could watch the fish through the glass floor. A water slide off the terrace directly into the Indian Ocean. Clara used it on the second morning in a cream swimsuit, and Natalie called up, "You do not have to," and Clara said, "I know," and went down. She came up laughing so hard, she had to tread water to recover. They had a private dinner on the beach one night, a table in the sand, lanterns, lobster, champagne, the sky enormous above them. On the third evening, Natalie said, "I want to go everywhere. Every place I told myself I would see when I finally had time." Clara said, "Then go." Natalie looked at her. Clara said, "I mean it. Go to all of it." Natalie went to Rome first. She stayed at the Hotel de la Ville on the Via Sistina and walked for 3 hours her first afternoon with no destination. She ate dinner alone outside a trattoria in Trastevere and watched the street and thought about nothing in particular, which was something she had not managed in most of her adult life. On the fourth morning, a man at the next terrace table looked out over the Roman rooftops and said in English, "The light does something different here. Every hour it is a different city." Natalie said, "Yes, I have been thinking the same thing." His name was James, British, 50 years old, a conservation architect in Rome for a conference on historic facades. They had coffee, then lunch. Then he asked if she would like to see a small Baroque church he was consulting on, and she said yes. They walked through Rome for the rest of the afternoon. That night at dinner, Natalie laughed the way she had not laughed since Robert, sudden and unguarded, and she called Clara from her hotel room and said, "I met someone." Clara said, "Tell me everything." James was 50 to Natalie's 70. She considered this the way she considered a clinical picture, waited, and then set it aside and had dinner with him again. He was not performing interest in her. He was simply interested in what she thought, in what 43 years of surgery had shown her, in who she was beneath all the things she had spent a lifetime becoming. On the last evening in Rome, he mentioned Florence and asked if she had any interest in joining him. She said, "I have never been to Florence." He said, "Then you should go." She went. She called Tiara from inside the Uffizi Gallery, standing in front of Botticelli's Primavera, and said without preamble, "I am in Florence with a 50-year-old Englishman, and I am not sorry about it." Tiara said, "Good." When Natalie came home 3 weeks later, she walked through the door differently. Something settled in her that had been unsettled. She said to Tiara and Clara, standing in the entrance hall with her bags still on the floor, "I am going to travel. Properly. For as long as I want." She said it without apology. Tiara said, "Good." Clara said, "Tell me about Florence." Back in Dubai, Tiara was noticing something. Women her age moving through the city with a particular invisibility, not because they lacked presence, but because they had been taught over decades to take up as little space as possible. She saw them at the spa, at restaurants, in the mall. Women with full and consequential lives behind them, moving as if still waiting for permission to enjoy what remained. She thought about the woman at the club who had said they were the most magnetic people in the room. She thought about what that had actually meant. Not that they were exceptional, but that they were visible, fully and unapologetically present. And she thought, what if there was a place built around that? Not a support group, not a therapy space, a place, beautiful and active and entirely premised on the idea that a woman at 70 is not finishing something. She is arriving. She called it Bloom. She told Clara that evening. Clara asked good questions, then asked what it would be called. When Tiara said Bloom, Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, that is exactly right." Tiara brought Lara on board as head of wellness programming. When she told Natalie, Natalie asked about capital and property and programming with the focused thoroughness of a woman trained to solve complex problems, then said, "You have thought this through." Tiara said, "I have thought of very little else." They went to Milan in November, stayed at the Bulgari Hotel, and moved through the Quadrilatero della Moda in coats designed for exactly that purpose. Clara bought 3 pairs of impractical heels and did not hesitate. Natalie acquired a large cognac travel bag for the life she was about to expand into. Tiara stopped at a wall of Loro Piana cashmere and stood in front of a shade of deep rose, warmer than pink, more serious than blush, and thought about the years she had worn black and white and navy because courtrooms required authority and left no room for joy. She bought the deep rose. She bought it also in burnt amber and in the green of the Gulf at evening. They had dinner and sat for 3 hours talking about Bloom and travels and what was coming. And the conversation moved the way it moves between people who have entirely stopped performing for each other. Natalie left for traveled in January with a loose itinerary and one large suitcase to travel the world. James was meeting her in Tokyo. He would not be there for all of it. That was fine. Clara found her house in February. Not in England where she had expected to look, but in the Tuscan countryside outside Florence, which Natalie had described with such particular warmth that something had lodged in Clara and stayed. A restored stone farmhouse on several acres. A long terrace over hills planted with olive trees. A kitchen with a wood-burning oven. 6 bedrooms. A loggia along the back with space for a long table and many people. She walked through every room on a cold February morning and knew. She called her daughter Sophie from the loggia. Sophie came the following weekend with all 3 grandchildren, who ran through the stone corridors with total freedom. Sophie walked the house slowly, then stood on the loggia and said, "Mom, this is extraordinary." Clara said, "Yes." Sophie looked at her mother, at the white hair and the quiet assurance that was new, or perhaps not new but finally visible, and said, "You look like yourself. Whatever you have been doing in Dubai, keep doing it." Clara said, "I intend to." That night, they had dinner on the loggia. Pasta for the children, roast chicken and wine for Clara and Sophie, the hills dark and the sky full of stars, the youngest child asleep at the table before dessert. Clara sat outside alone after everyone went in, with her wine and the cold Tuscan air, and thought about 40 years and about what came after. For the first time, the thought carried no sadness, only the quiet feeling of a beginning. Bloom opened in April. 2 floors in the Dubai International Financial Center with floor-to-ceiling windows and an upper terrace looking out over the city from the Gulf to the desert. Deep rose and cream interiors. A lounge with deep sofas and a library wall. A dining room with a seasonal menu. A wellness studio running Lara's programming, yoga, dance fitness, training designed for women arriving at their bodies rather than fighting them. A private event space for 60. The membership criteria was simple. You were a woman who wanted to live fully. On the opening night, Tiara stood at the entrance in the deep rose Loro Piana gown and received her guests with the composure of a woman watching something she had imagined into existence become real. Natalie came from Istanbul, silver bob slightly wind-blown, Van Cleef necklace in place, James behind her. Clara came from Tuscany with Sophie. The room filled with women who had heard, through the particular way certain things travel between women, about 3 friends at 70 who lived on the Palm and went to the gym at 7 in the morning and danced on rooftops and shopped in Milan and had somehow become the most alive people in every room they entered. At some point in the evening, Tiara moved to the center of the room and the conversations quieted. She said without notes, "I built this place because I needed it. Because at 70 years old, after a full and decorated career, I sat in a grief support group in central Dubai and realized I had never given myself permission to live outside my work. And I looked around this city and saw women everywhere with the same story." She looked around the room. "What I want this place to be is simple. A place where that story is not the whole story. Where you come and find your next chapter, whatever that looks like. Where there is room for the dancing and the travel and the dress and the color you always wanted to wear and the company of women who are doing the same thing." She paused. "You are not done. Not even close." The room filled with sound. Clara leaned to Natalie and said quietly, "She is going to change things." Natalie said, "She already has." Natalie sends photographs from everywhere around the world. She is not the woman who sat in that grief support group and said she could not remember the last time she had done something for herself. She has a notebook now that is full and another one waiting. James joins her for some of it. They have agreed without formal words that they are 2 people who choose each other rather than require each other, and that this is better. Clara's farmhouse becomes the kind of place that holds people. Sophie and the children every school holiday. The loggia table full on summer Saturdays. A kitchen garden Clara tends in the early morning in clothes that are specifically not designer, which she has decided suits her perfectly well. Tiara is building something. Bloom takes on 200 members in its first 3 months. A waiting list by the 6th. Conversations about London, then New York. Women come who have never danced. Women come who are newly retired and do not know what to do with their days. Women come grieving a marriage or a career or a version of themselves, and they find a room full of women who understand that grief from the inside and are on the other side of it and are dancing. This is not a story about what was lost. It is a story about what was found. Three women at 70 years old who looked at the years still ahead and decided, quietly, firmly, and without apology, that those years would be the fullest ones yet. If something in you recognizes what Tiara and Clara and Natalie felt, that waiting, that holding back, that sense of a life not yet fully lived, then this story was made for you. It is not too late. It was never too late. It is simply, finally time.